There was something hauntingly perfect about Vivian Rose. She wasn't the kind of woman who turned heads for her youth or bold fashion, but rather the kind who made you pause, a quiet, elegant beauty that didn't beg for attention but demanded it all the same. At 42, she carried herself with the grace of someone who had learned how to survive and how to charm. Evan Miller, 38, thought he had found a miracle. After a messy divorce and years of aimless dating, he met Vivian through a small, exclusive matchmaking agency, one he only joined at the urging of his mother. He had almost skipped his meeting with her. But the moment she walked into the little coffee shop on Main Street, dressed in ivory and speaking with a soft Southern accent, Evan felt something in him click into place. "She's unlike anyone I've ever met," he told his best friend Kyle after their third date. And indeed, she was. Vivian was poised, funny in an understated way, and almost unnervingly attentive. She remembered everything: how he took his coffee, what year he broke his ankle in college, which Beatles song made him tear up. In just 3 months, they were engaged. By month 5, they stood hand in hand in a rose-covered chapel just outside Asheville, North Carolina, exchanging vows in front of a dozen close friends and almost no family. Evan had been married before. Once. He didn't talk about it much, not even with Kyle. Her name was Dana, and they'd met in college, 2 awkward sophomores trying to navigate love and adulthood at the same time. She was sweet, spontaneous, and a little chaotic, which made her exciting. But after 8 years of marriage, Evan found out Dana had been having an affair with one of his coworkers. For almost 2 years. She didn't apologize. She didn't cry. She simply said, "I stopped feeling special. You made everything too ordinary." Those words haunted him. He spent the next 5 years building walls he swore no one would ever climb again. He threw himself into work. Stopped dating. He focused on his mother, who had been battling early signs of dementia, and reminded himself that not everyone was meant to be loved fully. His mother was a rigid woman, elegant, cold, and deeply religious. Growing up, Evan remembered hearing phrases like "love is a transaction" and "women admire strength, not sensitivity." He didn't know how much those words had shaped him until Vivian arrived, soft, affectionate, attentive in a way Dana never was. Vivian made him feel chosen, and that terrified him because somewhere deep down, he was afraid he had never really been enough. So when Vivian said, "You're everything I've ever wanted," he believed it. When she held his hand at dinner and remembered his favorite wine, he melted. And when she kissed him in front of the chapel that morning, beneath a floral archway, he whispered, "Please don't leave me." She smiled at him and said, "I'm not like the others." And he wanted to believe her so badly, it hurt. That struck Kyle as odd. "Where's her family?" he whispered to Evan before the ceremony. "She says it's just her and a cousin in Michigan," Evan replied, brushing it off. "Most of them passed, and she's not close to the rest." Kyle raised an eyebrow, but said nothing. He didn't want to ruin the day, but something about Vivian gnawed at him. She was too polished, too private, and too practiced at sadness. Later, over a glass of bourbon at the reception, Kyle did what any good friend would do. He pulled out his phone and started digging. Her name wasn't exactly rare, but when he typed in Vivian Rose plus marriage plus missing, a few strange links popped up. An obituary, no, 2, listing a woman named Vivian as the spouse of men who are now dead or missing. No foul play mentioned, no family statements, just vague details and private arrangements. Kyle's stomach tightened. He looked up to see Evan dancing with his new bride under the glow of string lights. Vivian's head rested gently on Evan's shoulder, her eyes closed like she'd waited her whole life for this moment. She looked peaceful, too peaceful. That night, back at the inn, Evan lay beside his wife, her hand resting lightly on his chest. Her breath was even, and her skin smelled like lavender and something older, something unfamiliar. "You ever think," she whispered, "how strange it is to finally find the right one?" He turned to look at her. "I think about it every day." She smiled in the dark. "Let's promise each other something." "What's that?" "No secrets. Ever." Evan nodded, though something inside him stirred. And outside, a storm rolled quietly over the mountains. The first time Evan felt true fear was 10 days after the honeymoon. It was a Tuesday evening, the kind of gray Carolina dusk that smelled like wet pine and old soil. Evan had gotten home early from work and thought he'd surprise Vivian by cooking dinner. He wasn't much of a chef, but she always smiled when he tried. Chicken piccata, her favorite. He remembered because she mentioned it once in passing over a glass of wine. Vivian noticed everything. He just didn't know she noticed too much. The moment he walked through the door, he sensed the air shift. The house, usually filled with the warm scent of her candles and soft jazz, was silent. No music, no lights, no Vivian. Then he heard it, the soft thump of a door downstairs. He followed the sound carefully, quiet as a whisper. The basement door was ajar, something he'd never seen before. Vivian had always kept it locked, claiming it was full of junk and broken memories. Tonight, she had forgotten. Inside, it was dark and cold. Boxes lined the wall, all meticulously labeled. Winter coats, old photos, books. But one, shoved awkwardly behind a shelf, caught his eye. It had no label, only a smudge of black ink. He reached for it. "Evan." Her voice sliced the air like a knife. He jumped and turned. Vivian stood at the top of the stairs, her face hidden in shadow. "What are you doing?" she asked calmly. But her eyes were sharp, locked on his hands. I thought I heard something." The door was open. She descended slowly, her silk robe whispering along the wooden railing. "That box isn't important," she said, gently pushing the lid closed. "Just old tax records." He nodded, said nothing, but his gut twisted. That night, she was unusually affectionate. She massaged his shoulders, lit a fire, poured him whiskey neat. Her lips brushed his ear as she whispered, "Let's not keep secrets, remember?" 3 days later, Kyle called. "You still want to know what I found?" he asked, voice low. Evan stepped outside, away from Vivian's ever-watchful eyes. "I'm listening." Kyle hesitated, then continued. "I found 2 obituaries. 2 guys who were married to women named Vivian, or at least women who used that name. One in Georgia, one in Oregon. Both died under weird circumstances. No foul play listed. No public details. Just gone." Evan's stomach turned. "Coincidence?" Kyle snorted. "There's more. I traced the Oregon one, guy named Mark Shelley. His brother posted years ago on a forum for missing persons. Said he always believed Mark's wife had something to do with it, but couldn't prove it. He included a wedding photo." Kyle paused. "I swear to God, Evan, it's her. Same eyes. Same damn smile." Evan sat down hard on the porch steps. "What do I do?" Kyle didn't answer right away. "Then, play along. But keep your eyes open. And if she ever offers you anything to drink that smells off, don't touch it." That night, Evan couldn't sleep. Vivian lay beside him like a porcelain doll, her chest rising and falling in a rhythm too calm for a human. In the moonlight, she looked angelic. And yet Evan's thoughts screamed, who was this woman? Why were there no photos from her childhood? No social media accounts? No wedding pictures from her previous marriages? Every trace of her before 2010 was like a ghost. He decided to search the house the next day while she was out. The following afternoon, as Vivian left for a book club meeting, Evan pried open the basement again. This time, he pulled the mystery box into the light. Inside weren't tax records. Instead, he found a bundle of old passports, each with her face but different names. Marriage certificates. 6 of them. One was his. Newspaper clippings with blurred headlines. Local man disappears after wedding. Wife declines to comment. Foul play not suspected. And then a small velvet box. He opened it. Inside were 5 gold wedding bands, identical in size, neatly arranged in a row. A chill shot down his spine. His hands trembled. Vivian had kept them. All of them. When she returned, Evan was back on the couch, pretending to nap. But something inside him had changed. His heart pounded with dread, and a single, devastating realization gripped him. He was husband number 6, and no one had made it past 5. Still, he smiled when she kissed his forehead and handed him a cup of tea. But this time, he didn't drink it. It happened 3 nights after he found the rings. Evan hadn't told Kyle yet. He was still processing it himself. The box, the passports, the clippings, the bands. He couldn't sleep, couldn't think, couldn't move without feeling Vivian's eyes on him, even when she wasn't in the room. That night, she made him chamomile tea. He hadn't asked for it. He was sitting on the couch, staring blankly at a muted television, when she appeared beside him, smiling softly. "You've been on edge lately," she said. "I thought this might help." Her tone was sweet, comforting. Her robe smelled like vanilla and cedarwood. He took the cup. His hands trembled slightly. She sat across from him, tucking her legs under her and watching. "I'm fine," he said. "Just work." She tilted her head, studying him. "I know when something's wrong. You don't have to lie to me." He smiled weakly. "It's just stress." She leaned in, her voice barely above a whisper. "I would never hurt you, Evan." It took everything in him not to flinch. She watched him raise the cup. He hesitated, just for a second, but it was enough. Her smile didn't fade. She simply waited. He brought it to his lips, pretended to sip, but something in the steam hit him immediately, a bitter metallic trace just beneath the floral notes. His heart pounded. He coughed lightly. "Hot," he said. She nodded. "Take your time." Minutes passed. She got up, humming, and began folding a blanket nearby. He slipped to the kitchen, dumped the tea, rinsed the cup, and returned to the glass of water. Then, everything went black. He woke up hours later on the floor of their bedroom. His head ached. His vision was blurred. His limbs, fuzzy, heavy like wet sandbags. Vivian sat at the edge of the bed, watching. "I know you didn't drink at all," she said gently, "but you drank enough." Evan tried to move. Couldn't. He couldn't feel his arms. "I didn't want to hurt you," she said, "but you're starting to pry." Her voice wasn't angry, not cold, just disappointed. "You looked in the box," she continued. "I saw the scuff marks on the floor. You were careful, but not careful enough." She reached down and brushed hair from his damp forehead. "I should end it now. That would be smart. Clean." He tried to speak, but his throat betrayed him. "But here's the thing, Evan," she whispered, leaning closer. "You're the only one who ever looked. The others they trusted, blindly. They made me feel invisible, like furniture." She smiled faintly. "But not you." He closed his eyes, waiting for pain, waiting for cold, waiting for nothing. Instead, she kissed his cheek and said, "Let's try again. Maybe you'll understand me better this time." And just like that, she left. He woke up at dawn, alone in bed, fully clothed. No blood, no bruises, just a lingering taste of bitterness in his mouth and a line of sweat down his spine. Vivian was in the kitchen, cooking eggs. She turned when he entered and smiled like nothing happened. "Morning, sleepyhead. You passed out last night. I think the stress is really catching up with you." He stared at her numb. She kissed his cheek. "I'm glad you're okay." He sat down, hands trembling beneath the table, and realized something vital. She could have killed him. She didn't. She wanted to be seen, and she wanted to be understood. It wasn't over. It was just beginning. From that night on, Evan Miller stopped being a husband and became a survivor. He no longer made love to Vivian with the same ease. Every kiss now carried a trace of suspicion. Every plate of food she served felt like a test. Every question she asked seemed like a probe. But outwardly, he was perfect, loving, attentive, just as she expected. Inside, he was preparing for war. He bought a micro camera online, disguised as a phone charger. He slipped it into the bedroom socket, then another in the kitchen, one above the basement door. He backed up all footage nightly to a private drive hidden inside an encrypted folder labeled work reports. He also called Kyle again. "I need help," Evans said. "She's dangerous." Kyle drove in from Atlanta that weekend, pretending to be a buddy just visiting. Over beers on the patio, they spoke in code while Vivian made lemon cake inside. "She's charming," Kyle said aloud. Then, under his breath, "She's watching us. I can feel it. She always is," Evan murmured. They walked to the edge of the backyard, pretending to admire the garden. "I found 5 rings," Evan whispered. "And passports. Fake ones. Her face, different names. All of them ended up married. All of them disappeared." Kyle clenched his jaw. "This isn't just weird anymore, man. This is serial." Evan nodded. "I think she drugs them. Kills them when they're weak. Makes it look like they vanished or had accidents." Kyle stared at him. "What's your plan?" Evan exhaled slowly. "I'm going to let her try, and then I'll catch her in the act." The setup began the following week. Evan started acting sluggish, confused. He told Vivian he wasn't feeling well. He began skipping meals, lying in bed longer. He complained of dizziness, headaches, fatigue. It wasn't hard. He barely slept anymore. Vivian, true to form, was the picture of concern. "Maybe you're pushing yourself too hard," she cooed, stroking his hair. "Let me make you tea. I'll pick up something from the pharmacy. You just rest, sweetheart." And she did. The first time she brought him tea, Evan pretended to drink it. Later, while she was watering the porch plants, he poured it into a plastic bag and froze the contents for later testing. He sent it to Kyle, who had a friend in a lab. The results came back 2 days later. A high dose of zolpidem, a potent sedative. "It was enough to knock out a man your size for hours," Kyle said. "Mixed with alcohol, it could stop your heart." Evan knew it was coming. On the 3rd Friday, Vivian suggested they celebrate their mini-month anniversary. She brought home wine, his favorite bourbon-glazed salmon, and that same lemon cake. She poured his drink herself. As they toasted, she watched him closely. "To us," she said, smiling sweetly. Evan lifted the glass to his lips, but didn't drink. Instead, he yawned. "I'm exhausted, babe. Mind if I crash early?" She kissed him on the cheek. "Of course not. I'll tidy up down here." Upstairs, Evan swapped clothes for the set he'd stained with fake sweat and watered-down syrup. He lay on the bed, breathing shallow, eyes closed. Minutes passed. Then he heard the stairs creak. Vivian entered softly. He peeked from under one eyelid, just enough to see her silhouette approach. She leaned in close, her breath warm on his ear. "Sleep tight, Evan," she whispered. "It'll all be over soon." Then nothing. He stayed still. More minutes passed. Then he heard the scraping of furniture from downstairs. A metallic clang. A door creaked open. The basement. She was preparing something. He rolled off the bed silently and activated the Bluetooth trigger on his phone. The hidden camera downstairs began streaming to Kyle's laptop. Kyle, waiting nearby, called the local sheriff, already briefed and on standby. Evan crept downstairs, careful not to step too heavily. Through the crack in the door, he watched Vivian lifting something heavy, a tarp-wrapped bundle, into a large chest freezer. Not food, not storage, something meant to hide a body. His body. She turned, pulling out a syringe from a robe pocket and muttered, "Just one more night." Evan stepped forward. "Looking for this?" Vivian froze. She turned slowly, her expression a mix of confusion and calculation. "You're supposed to be asleep," she said, almost amused. "I bet they all were." For a long moment, Neither of them moved. Then Vivian lunged. He dodged, grabbed her wrist, and twisted the syringe away. She fought like a woman possessed, biting, clawing, screaming. Evan managed to hold her off long enough for deputies to burst through the front door. Vivian stopped struggling. Her expression turned to stone. She looked at Evan one last time and smiled. Not with anger, but admiration. I was wondering how long it would take. The sirens pierced the night like a blade through silk. Deputies stormed the house with precision, weapons drawn, flashlights slicing across walls and furniture. Vivian didn't flinch. She stood by the open basement door, wrists raised gently in surrender. No tears, no pleading, just that same eerie calm Evan had come to dread. As they handcuffed her, one officer read her rights. Vivian simply nodded, as though this moment had been inevitable from the start. Be careful, Evan warned them. She's smarter than she looks. She's not the first pretty sociopath we've seen, one deputy muttered, but even he glanced at her twice, unsettled. Downstairs, the true horror began to unfold. The freezer wasn't empty. Inside, neatly vacuum-sealed, were what appeared to be ashes, carefully labeled in freezer bags. 5 of them. Each had a name scrawled in faded black marker. Mark Shelley, 2013. Daniel Ross, 2014. Anthony Lively, 2016. Henry Morris, 2018. David Quinn, 2020. All husbands, all presumed missing. None ever found, until now. Next to the freezer, tucked behind a false panel in the wall, investigators discovered a small climate-controlled vault. Inside were meticulously preserved personal belongings: watches, cufflinks, love letters, passports, wallets, souvenirs from each of the men. Each item was labeled, organized, cherished. This isn't just murder, the lead detective muttered. This is ritual. Evan stood in the corner, shaking, numb. The sight of 5 lives reduced to ashes and trinkets nearly broke him. He recognized one of the watches. He'd seen Vivian wear it one night, claiming it was a gift from an uncle. Kyle arrived minutes later, breathless, wide-eyed. You okay, man? Evan nodded barely. She almost got me, he whispered. At the station, Vivian remained silent for hours. No lawyer, no protests, just silence. Then, just after midnight, she spoke. Softly. I never lied, she said. They knew who I was. I was the best thing that ever happened to them. Detective Morales leaned forward. You killed them. Vivian tilted her head. No, I freed them. The next morning, the news broke nationwide. Black Widow killer arrested in North Carolina. Suspected in 5 disappearances. The media swarmed. Everyone wanted to know who she was, where she came from, and how no one had seen the pattern before. It didn't take long for the deeper layers to surface. Vivian Rose wasn't her real name. Not even close. Her true identity? Lillian Monroe. Born in 1981. Raised in foster care after a fire killed both parents. Though records later suggested the fire had been set intentionally. She had a history of juvenile violence, attacking a male teacher, attempting to stab a foster brother, multiple suspensions. At 18, she disappeared. Reappeared 3 years later in Oregon under a new name, Veronica Ray, and married her first victim. Authorities now believe she'd used at least 7 different aliases over the last 2 decades, cycling through states, creating new identities and charming new victims. She never stayed in one place more than 2 years. Each time, she reinvented herself. New hair, new voice, new backstory. And each time, she left no body, only questions. Until now, back at the house, a deeper investigation began. Beneath the floorboards of the basement, cadaver dogs alerted to a hidden chamber. Inside, they found chemical drums, presumably used for dissolving remains before cremation, and detailed journals. Journals written in neat, feminine cursive. Pages upon pages, detailing each marriage, each seduction, each moment she decided the man was no longer worthy. One passage read, "Mark was kind but dull. He forgot anniversaries. He left dishes in the sink. One night, he raised his voice. I gave him 3 warnings. The 4th came with a drink. Another. Henry cried when I said I was leaving. Weakness disgusts me. He asked if I still loved him. I said yes. Then I smiled and made tea. Vivian didn't kill out of rage. She killed for control, for the illusion of power, to erase what she deemed imperfect. The journals were bound in soft, cream-colored leather. Dozens of them, lined up in a lacquered wooden box beneath the floorboards, perfectly preserved despite the damp. Each one labeled by year, tied shut with thin red ribbon. They weren't hidden like evidence. They were displayed like trophies. Detectives didn't know what they'd find inside. They expected confessions or maybe some kind of financial log. What they got was far more disturbing. Vivian, or rather Lillian Monroe, had written everything. Not in the panic scrawl of a guilty mind, but in elegant, measured script. Neat margins, clean lines, each entry dated. Each chapter, because that's what they read like, focused on a different man. Mark, Daniel, Anthony, Henry, David, and finally, Evan. Mark was soft. He believed love was enough. He never once noticed when I began logging his schedule. He was easy to vanish. Daniel made me laugh. But laughter fades, and he began to look at other women, even after I warned him. Men are so easily bored. So easily broken. Henry cried when I told him I was leaving. Weakness disgusts me. I brewed his final tea that same night. Lavender and cyanide. David wanted to fix me. He said he could see my pain. What he didn't understand is, I'm not broken. I'm designed. The pages weren't filled with bloodlust. There were no rants, no curses, no justification. Instead, what emerged was a system of logic, a methodical evaluation of her victims. They were scored, dissected, ranked. She kept track of how long it took each man to stop opening doors for her, how long before he forgot a compliment, how often he checked his phone during dinner. Every slip was documented. Every emotional offense tallied like a sin. They promised love, but they brought rust. I simply cleaned house. There is an entire volume dedicated to psychological games. She wrote about the art of disarming control, giving affection, taking it away, rewarding obedience with touch, punishing doubt with distance. She documented Evan more than any other. He was clever. I underestimated that. He noticed too much, moved too quietly. I began testing him earlier than usual. When he found the box, I let him believe he was safe. I wanted to see what he'd do, whether he'd run or fight. When he passed out from the tea, I could have ended it. But there was something novel about him, a sense of symmetry, like he knew the shape of me, even if he couldn't see the design. Detective Morales read the entries for hours. He didn't speak for a long time after closing the last one. Then he said quietly, "She didn't kill because she was angry. She killed because she thought it was maintenance." One of the younger officers, barely out of the academy, asked, "Why keep the journals?" Morales looked at him. To be remembered. Among the final pages, in the last journal marked 2025, was a short poem, handwritten, centered on the page. Some build statues. Some write songs. I build echoes and bury wrongs. It was signed simply, V. There was no journal for the first one. No ribbon-tied leather book. No neat handwriting. No poem. Just a memory. She was 23, living in Portland under the name Eliza Warren. She worked at a bookstore and rented a studio apartment above a flower shop. It rained constantly. She liked that. The sound covered everything. His name was Derek Malone. He was 10 years older. A college professor, charming, confident, and too sure of his place in the world. He wore nice suits and liked quoting Kafka. He called her his wild thing, said she was mysterious, special, his undoing. She thought it was romantic at first. Until she saw how he treated the barista, how he touched her too long, until he said, "You remind me of my daughter when she was younger." That was the moment. It always began with a moment. Something small, something that fractured the illusion. She didn't kill him with poison. That came later. With Derek, it was a hammer. She waited until he had fallen asleep in her bed, snoring, belly up, arms sprawled like a king. She stood over him for nearly 10 minutes, just watching. She thought, this is what they all become. Something soft, something unaware. And then she struck. Twice. Once in the forehead, once in the temple. He never opened his eyes. She didn't panic. She wrapped the body in a sheet, cleaned the blood, disassembled the bed frame, scrubbed the floors with lemon bleach. The next morning, she called the flower shop downstairs and said she'd be gone for a few days, family emergency. Then she rented a van. She drove 3 hours east to a stretch of land behind an abandoned barn. She dug a hole herself. It took nearly 7 hours. Her hands blistered. Her back screamed. But when it was done, she felt nothing. No remorse. No elation. Just stillness. The next day, she cut her hair, burned every photo of them together, walked into the DMV with a forged birth certificate, and became Veronica Ray. She never spoke Derek's name again, never wrote about him. But years later, in a journal entry about another man, she left a single line. The first goodbye is always the quietest. Evan sat in the station's hallway, listening to the soft click of the coffee machine, staring at nothing. "You save lives," Kyle told him. She would have done it again. Evan nodded, but there was no relief in his eyes, only exhaustion. "I loved her," he said, voice cracking. "I truly did." Kyle placed a hand on his shoulder. "You loved a mask." Evan didn't answer. Before being transferred to federal custody, Vivian requested one final conversation with Evan. He hesitated but agreed. They met through glass, a prison phone between them. She wore no makeup. Her hair was pulled back tightly. Still elegant. Still composed. "I suppose this is goodbye," she said. He stared at her. "Why me?" She smiled faintly. "You were different. Smarter. I hoped you'd last longer." And the others? They were disappointments. She leaned in closer to the glass. "If I had met you first, Evan, maybe none of this would have happened." He hung up without replying. As he walked away, she tapped the glass once and smiled. Long before she became Vivian Rose, she was Lillian Monroe, a little girl with strawberry blonde curls and a mother who hummed lullabies even when she cried. At least, that's how the neighbors remembered her. But Lillian never talked about her childhood. Not to Evan, not to detectives, not even in court. The truth came from documents, psychiatric reports, and the rare fragments left behind by those who dared to look too closely. She was 6 when the house caught fire. Her parents were asleep. Lillian, the only survivor, was found curled up in the hallway, untouched by smoke. Investigators ruled it an accident, faulty wiring. But the fire inspector's report noted something odd. The matchbox found under her bed, the faint smell of gasoline on her clothes. No charges were filed. The case was closed, and Lillian was sent to foster care. Between ages 7 and 17, she lived in 9 different homes. The files were riddled with red flags, behavioral outbursts, violent drawings, lying, manipulation. One therapist wrote, "Lillian exhibits an unusual detachment from consequences. She mimics emotions well, but does not appear to feel them as others do." Another noted, "She thrives when she is adored and becomes dangerous when that attention fades." At 15, She was accused of pushing a foster brother down the stairs. He survived, but with a broken leg and a shattered sense of safety. At 17, she disappeared entirely, vanished from her final placement just weeks before her 18th birthday. 2 years later, she resurfaced as Veronica Ray in Oregon. No one knew it was her. The new identity was perfect. Clean papers, falsified records, a fresh smile. She worked as a florist, sang in the church choir, wore pastel dresses, and offered cookies to the mailman. She met Mark Shelley at a farmer's market. They married after 6 months. Less than a year later, he vanished during a camping trip alone. No body, no trace. She moved 2 states away, changed her name again. Then again, then again. Each man, each story followed the same rhythm. Charm, seduce, isolate, eliminate. Not one of them saw it coming. Not one of them left alive. What drove her? Some believed it was power, the control of life and death. Others said childhood trauma twisted her soul. Years of abandonment, neglect, and emotional starvation hollowed her out until she could only feel alive through the act of possession. But there was another theory, one that surfaced from her journals. In a passage dated just months before her arrest, she wrote, "Love is a test. A man must prove himself every day. The moment he forgets, the moment he slips, I remind him who I am." Another entry read, "Some people collect stamps. I collect goodbyes." Lillian didn't kill for money. She never drained their bank accounts. She never fled with assets. Most of her victims' funds remained untouched. She killed for the moment. That fragile, intoxicating second where the man realized, too late, that the woman he loved wasn't real. That moment of betrayal, fear, and dependence was her high. She was the flame, and they were moths. Evan was the only one who didn't burn. In custody, she became something of a legend. Psychologists visited. Criminologists studied her. Writers requested interviews. She declined all of them, except one, a young therapist named Dr. Megan Holloway, who reminded Vivian of her younger self. During their final recorded session, Dr. Holloway asked, "Do you regret any of it?" Vivian tilted her head. "Regret," she echoed. "I regret choosing men who thought love was a gift that didn't need polishing. I regret trusting that they could match me." Dr. Holloway pressed, "What about Evan?" Vivian smiled. "He passed the test. That's why he's still breathing." For the rest of the world, Vivian Rose was a monster in makeup. But behind a mask, Lillian Monroe was something far more dangerous. A woman who could wear empathy like a dress, take love like a loan, and return nothing but ash. 6 months had passed. The headlines had faded. The media frenzy moved on to newer, louder horrors. But for Evan Miller, time hadn't softened anything. It had only sharpened the edges. He had moved out of the house in Asheville. Couldn't bear to sleep under the same roof where she whispered in his ear. He rented a small cabin on the outskirts of Boone, quiet, surrounded by trees, far from the world. He no longer slept well, not since the trial. Lillian Monroe, had refused to speak during the proceedings. Her lawyers argued diminished capacity. The prosecution countered with premeditation, pattern, and pure evil. It didn't matter. The jury didn't take long. Life in federal prison. No parole. No appeals. Still, she smiled when the verdict was read. Life behind bars was supposed to be the end of her story. But for Vivian Rose, or Lillian Monroe, it was simply a new beginning. She was assigned to a high-security federal facility in West Virginia. Cameras watched every corridor. Guards walked in pairs. Inmates were limited to supervised recreation and strictly monitored communications. It didn't matter. Within 2 weeks, she had learned everyone's names on her block: guards, orderlies, nurses, fellow inmates. Within 4, she knew which ones were on medication, Which ones had sick mothers? Which ones are going through divorces? And most importantly, which ones needed to be seen? Officer Ryan Griggs was one of the new ones. Young, fit, straight-laced. But there was something too eager in his posture, an energy that said, I want to be respected, but never quite made eye contact. Vivian spotted it instantly. She never flirted. That would have been too obvious. Instead, she was kind, gentle, polite. She asked about his day, his shift schedule, whether he was sleeping well. She once told him after breakfast, "You remind me of someone I knew. He had kind hands, strong but kind." He didn't respond. But the next day, he brought her an extra packet of sugar for her tea. By the third week, he lingered outside her cell. She didn't speak that time, just smiled. Let the silence say what her words wouldn't. That night, Officer Griggs stood outside the warden's office for 7 minutes, unmoving, staring at the door. Then he turned and left. Vivian never asked him to do anything. She didn't have to. A few days later, she received a second blanket, a luxury in winter months. 2 nights after that, her mail began arriving and censored. On the 5th week, she was found in the library, alone, reading a file she was never supposed to touch. When questioned, she simply smiled and said, "It was sitting there. I assumed it was meant for me." No one could prove anything. But the security team was rotated the next week, and Officer Griggs was quietly reassigned to night shift in the medical wing. He didn't say goodbye, but he did leave a folded piece of paper under the slot of her cell door. It read, "You were right. They don't see me, but you did." Vivian added it to her collection. She didn't need to escape. She didn't need violence. All she needed was access and someone to listen. Every game had new rules, but she always played to win. Her name was Layla Torres, just 19, arrested for grand theft auto and assault. A foster care kid with more scars than stories, and a temper that kept her in isolation for most of her first month. She met Vivian in the infirmary. Both were waiting for medication. Vivian had bruises from a fall. Layla had cracked her knuckles punching a wall. They didn't speak at first, but Vivian noticed everything. How Layla refused to meet anyone's eyes. How she curled in on herself like she expected to be hit. How she spit on the floor every time a guard passed by. "Anger is a leash," Vivian said quietly one day, "and you keep handing them the handle." Layla looked up, startled. "What did you say?" Vivian smiled softly. "You want them to fear you, not pity you." Layla didn't answer, but she didn't spit that day. Over the next weeks, they were coincidentally placed near each other in the yard. Vivian never forced conversation, just made observations. You're not stupid. You see the patterns. You know when someone's lying. They'll try to fix you because they think you're broken. But what if you're not? Layla started following her with her eyes, then with her feet. By the 3rd week, she was asking questions. Why are you so calm all the time? Don't you care what they did to you? Did you really kill 5 men? Vivian never answered directly, but one day, she handed Layla a page torn from the edge of a book. On it, she had written, "Weakness is predictable. Control is sacred." Layla read it 5 times, folded it into a square, hid it in her shoe. A week later, she stopped fighting the guards. She started asking for books instead of yard time. She requested to be moved to Vivian's cell block. The request was denied, but the change had begun. At night, Layla would lie on her bunk and repeat things she'd heard Vivian say. "You don't have to scream to be heard. Men don't like women who see too much. That's their first mistake. Never cry in front of a man who calls you his girl." She began writing in a notebook. Not her crimes, not her regrets, just thoughts, quotes, fragments. She cut her hair short. She started using a new name with the guards. V. One evening, a nurse found a note folded under Layla's pillow. It read, "There's more than one way to survive a cage. Some rot, some hide, some build legacies. Sign V." Vivian never confirmed she gave Layla anything. She never spoke of her. But one afternoon, during yard time, she passed Layla on the track. Their eyes met for a brief second, and Vivian smiled. Eva tried to rebuild. He returned to work, saw a therapist, attended a survivor support group. Though most of the others had lost family to accidents or cancer, not a woman who nearly froze them in a basement after sedating them with wine. No one quite knew what to say to him. "You're lucky," they would tell him, and he would nod. But luck didn't explain the dreams. He still saw her in them, wearing white, standing barefoot in the hallway, watching him with that slight, terrible smile. One evening, he received a letter. No return address, no markings, just his name, written in the same delicate cursive she used to label the tea jars. He opened it slowly. "Dear Evan, there are moments I replay again and again. The look on your face when you found the box. The shake in your hands when you read the names. And most of all, the way you still kissed me good night even after you knew. You were brave. You passed the test. They never did. I wonder sometimes if you miss me. I miss you in small ways. In silence. In memory. You were my favorite goodbye. V." He folded the letter, hands cold. She wasn't done. Even locked behind steel bars and concrete walls, Vivian's reach still found him. Not through violence, but through presence. Through the haunting suggestion that nothing was ever really over. Kyle thought it would all end with the trial. Vivian was locked away. Evan had survived. Justice had spoken. He should have felt relief. But in the months that followed, Kyle found himself checking the locks twice before bed. He unplugged his smart speaker, started ignoring unknown numbers. He stopped dating, stopped sleeping well. Every time he scrolled through news feeds, he half expected to see her face again. She was behind bars. He reminded himself of that daily. And yet, something about her stayed with him. Not just her crimes, not just her stare, but the idea of her. Vivian didn't need knives. She didn't need poison. She just needed you to listen. 3 weeks after Evan got her letter, Kyle received one too. No name, no return address, just his own, written in blocky, masculine print. Inside was a single line typed in courier font. "You were smart to look. That makes you dangerous." Or interesting. No signature, just a printed symbol in the bottom right corner, a minimalist V. His stomach twisted. He told himself it was a joke. Told himself it was someone from work playing off the media circus. But still, he kept the letter, folded it twice, tucked it into a locked drawer. And every so often, when the house was quiet, he swore he heard her voice again. Not in words, not even in whispers, just the echo of a woman who never truly needed freedom to be free. He called Evan that night. Asked if he was okay. Asked if he'd seen anything strange. Evan didn't mention the second letter he'd gotten 2 days prior. They hung up after an hour. Said goodnight, but neither of them really slept. Weeks later, Evan visited a bookstore in town. The owner, an older woman with kind eyes, recognized him and gently offered him a book from the true crime shelf. He looked at the title and smiled weakly. Black Widow. The Vivian Rose Murders. He turned it over. On the back, a quote from one of the lead detectives read, "Some killers want attention. She wanted permanence." Evan didn't buy the book. He didn't need to. He had lived it. Back in the cabin, he walked to the wood stove and tossed the letter into the flames. Watched it curl, darken, and vanish. Then, for the first time in weeks, he stepped outside. The air was sharp with the coming of fall. A bird sang somewhere in the pines. Life somehow moved on, but deep inside he knew there would always be part of him still in that house, still lying in bed pretending to sleep, still waiting to die. And part of her was still watching. He tried dating again. 6 months after the trial, encouraged by his therapist and pushed by well-meaning friends, Evan agreed to dinner with a woman named Celeste. She was kind, spoke with a calm warmth that reminded him of someone, but he couldn't place who. They talked about books, about dogs, about wine. She reached across the table once to touch his hand. He flinched. He apologized. She smiled politely. The date ended early. He started having what his therapist called psychosomatic symptoms. Nausea around the smell of chamomile. Panic attacks in dimly lit kitchens. A tremor in his left hand that came and went like a ghost. He stopped using mugs altogether. Only drank from bottles he opened himself. At night, he locked every door twice and still slept with a flashlight under the pillow. He kept the letter, the one she sent him from prison. Sometimes he swore it still smelled faintly of her perfume. Other times he thought he imagined that. Once, he brought it close to a candle flame, watched the edges curl, then changed his mind and pressed it flat again. Some scars you fold, some you frame. In group therapy, someone asked, "What makes a survivor different from a victim?" Evan didn't answer at the time, but the question stuck with him for days. He eventually wrote in his journal, "A victim dies once. A survivor dies 1,000 times. Every time they wake up from a dream, every time they touch a memory, every time they wonder if it's over. And yet, they keep breathing." He moved again, farther into the mountains. No neighbors in sight, no mailbox, no internet. He chopped his own wood, built furniture by hand, read philosophy and old crime novels. Spoke to no one for weeks at a time. People assumed he was running from her memory. They were wrong. He was learning to live with it, to give it a room in his mind, but not the whole house. To stop waiting for her voice behind every rustle of leaves. And then, one spring morning, Evan found a letter tucked inside his screen door. No stamp, no address, only a single sheet of paper torn from a journal. It read, "You were always the exception. And even now, I wonder what you're building out there. Maybe it's peace. Maybe it's a trap. V." Evan stood in the doorway for a long time. Then he lit the wood stove and fed the letter to the flames without reading it again. He didn't tell anyone. He didn't run. He just went back to carving wood in silence, listening to the wind press against the glass. She was still behind bars, but she was also, always, watching. If you found this story intriguing, leave a comment. I'd love to know what you think. Do you believe some people are born dangerous, or are they made by the world around them? And don't forget to subscribe for more chilling, true crime stories brought to life just for you.